Elvis was in the middle of burning love when he smelled smoke. The venue owner had locked the emergency exits to prevent people from sneaking in without tickets. What Elvis did in the next 4 minutes didn't just save 200 lives. It changed fire safety laws across America forever. It was October 14, 1962, at the Riverside Theater in Cleveland, Ohio. Elvis was performing a late-night show to a packed house of 2,000 screaming fans. The venue was old, built in 1924, with narrow aisles, low ceilings, and wooden floors that creaked under the weight of dancing teenagers. The show had sold out in hours, and hundreds of disappointed fans had gathered outside, hoping to hear the music through the walls or catch a glimpse of Elvis leaving. That's when venue owner Frank Castellano made a decision that nearly cost 200 people their lives. Castellano was a 52-year-old businessman who owned 3 entertainment venues in Cleveland. He was known for cutting corners, maximizing profits, and treating safety regulations as suggestions rather than requirements. Earlier that evening, he'd noticed fans trying to slip in through the emergency exits during the opening act. "Lock those back doors," he told his security chief, Mike Torres. "I don't care what the fire code says. I'm not letting freeloaders cost me money." Torres hesitated. "Frank, those are emergency exits. We're not supposed to lose money to gatecrashers either," Castellano snapped. "Lock them. If there's a problem, we'll deal with it later." So Torres had reluctantly chained and padlocked the 4 emergency exits, leaving only the main entrance and one side door for 2,000 people. It was a violation of multiple fire codes, but Castellano figured nothing would happen in 2 hours. He was wrong. At 10:47 p.m., during Elvis's performance of Burning Love, an electrical short in the aging wiring system sparked a fire in the basement storage room. The flames spread quickly through the old wooden infrastructure, feeding on decades of dust, debris, and flammable materials that had been ignored by building inspectors who had been paid to look the other way. Elvis was the first to notice. In the middle of singing, he caught a whiff of smoke and saw a thin gray haze beginning to seep up through the floorboards near the stage. His band was so focused on the performance they hadn't noticed yet, and the audience was too caught up in the music to pay attention to anything else. But Elvis had grown up poor in Mississippi, in houses with faulty wiring and fire hazards everywhere. He knew the smell of electrical fire, and he knew how fast old buildings could burn. He stopped singing mid-verse. "Hold on, folks," Elvis said into his microphone, his voice calm but commanding. "We've got a little situation here." The band stopped playing, confused. The audience continued cheering, thinking this was part of the show. But those closest to the stage could see Elvis's face, and they could see that something was wrong. "I need everyone to stay calm," Elvis continued, "but we need to evacuate this building right now. There's a fire in the basement, and we need to get everyone out safely." That's when the panic started. Someone screamed, "Fire!" and 2,000 people simultaneously tried to rush toward the exits. But there were only 2 ways out of a building designed to hold 200 people maximum. The main entrance became a deadly bottleneck as hundreds of people pushed and shoved, desperate to escape. Elvis jumped off the stage into the crowd. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice carrying over the chaos. "Everyone stop moving!" Incredibly, they did. The power of Elvis's voice combined with the authority of his presence cut through the panic. 2,000 terrified people turned to look at the man who had been entertaining them moments before. "Listen to me very carefully," Elvis said, moving through the crowd toward the main exit. "We're all going to get out of here safely, but only if we work together. I need you to form lines and walk, don't run, toward the exits." But when Elvis reached the main entrance, he found a horrifying scene. The narrow doorway was already clogged with people pushing and falling over each other. Several fans had been trampled and were lying unconscious on the floor. The exit was blocked by the bodies of people who had been crushed in the stampede. Elvis looked around desperately for other exits. That's when he saw them. 4 emergency doors with heavy chains and padlocks securing them shut. "Son of a bitch," Elvis muttered. He grabbed Mike Torres, who was standing nearby looking panicked. "Where are the keys to these doors?" "Mr. Castellano has them," Torres replied. "Where is he?" "He left when the fire started, went out through his private exit in the office." Elvis stared at Torres for a moment, processing what he'd just heard. The venue owner had locked the emergency exits, then fled the building when it started burning, leaving 2,000 people trapped inside with no way out. The smoke was getting thicker now. People were starting to cough. The temperature in the building was rising as the fire spread through the walls and ceiling. They had maybe 5 minutes before the situation became unsurvivable. Elvis made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He grabbed a fire axe from the wall and walked to the nearest emergency exit. The crowd watched in amazement as Elvis Presley, in his rhinestone jumpsuit and cape, began swinging the axe at the heavy chain securing the door. "Everyone stay back from this door," Elvis shouted as he worked. "As soon as I get it open, I want you to form a line and walk out calmly." The chain was thick and the padlock was industrial strength, but Elvis was fueled by adrenaline and desperation. After 6 powerful swings, the chain snapped. Elvis threw open the door and cool night air rushed in, providing immediate relief to the smoke-filled building. "Go," Elvis commanded. "Single file. Help anyone who's fallen. No pushing." As fans began streaming out through the first exit, Elvis ran to the second emergency door and began attacking its chain with the axe. His band members, Jerry Sheff on bass, James Burton on guitar, and Ronnie Tutt on drums, had followed him and were helping to organize the evacuation. "Elvis, you need to get out of here," Jerry shouted over the noise. "The ceiling's starting to sag." "Not until everyone else is out," Elvis replied, breaking through the second chain. By now, the fire had reached the main floor. Flames were visible along the far wall, and the smoke was so thick that visibility was down to a few feet. The temperature had risen to over 100 degrees, and people were struggling to breathe. Elvis opened the second exit and directed more people outside, then moved to the third door. But this chain was newer and stronger, and the axe was getting dull from the previous work. After several swings, Elvis realized he wasn't making progress fast enough. That's when Charlie Hodge, Elvis's longtime friend and rhythm guitarist, appeared beside him with a crowbar he'd found somewhere. "Together," Charlie said. They worked as a team, Elvis swinging the axe while Charlie pried at the weak points in the chain. Behind them, the remaining crowd was pressed against the walls, trying to stay as far from the flames as possible. Finally, the third chain broke. Elvis threw open the door and immediately saw a problem. About 50 people were trapped in the far corner of the building, cut off from all 3 exits by a wall of flames that had spread across the middle of the floor. "We can't reach them," Charlie shouted. Elvis looked at the situation, calculating distances and timing. The trapped fans were mostly teenage girls who had been sitting in the front rows, closest to the stage. They were pressed against the far wall, crying and screaming, watching the fire advance toward them. Without hesitation, Elvis ran directly through the flames. His cape caught fire immediately, and he had to tear it off and throw it aside. The heat was so intense it felt like his skin was melting, but he made it to the trapped fans. "Follow me," he commanded. "Stay low and move fast." Elvis led the group of 50 terrified teenagers back through the fire, his body serving as a shield between them and the worst of the flames. Several of his sequins melted from the heat, and his jumpsuit was singed and smoking, but he got every single person to safety. As the last fan exited the building, Elvis finally allowed himself to leave. But he didn't go far. He stood outside the theater, counting people and making sure everyone was accounted for. That's when Frank Castellano returned. Castellano had been safely in his car 3 blocks away when he decided to come back and see if his building could be saved. When he saw Elvis standing outside, covered in soot and burns, he immediately understood what had happened. "You had no right to break into my building," Castellano screamed. "Those chains were there for a reason." Elvis walked over to Castellano slowly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly to everyone around. "Your reason was greed. You locked emergency exits to save a few dollars on security, and you nearly killed 200 people. "Those weren't real emergencies," Castellano protested. "People were sneaking in." "People were about to die," Elvis replied, "and you ran away and left them." By now, the fire department and police had arrived. The fire chief, Captain Robert Murphy, immediately began investigating the scene. When he discovered the broken chains on the emergency exits, his face went white. "Who locked these doors?" Murphy demanded. Before Castellano could answer, a dozen witnesses pointed at him and told the story. Murphy arrested Castellano on the spot for reckless endangerment and violation of fire safety codes. But the story was far from over. The next morning, newspapers across the country ran the story with headlines like, Elvis saves 200 lives in theater fire, and King of Rock becomes King of Heroes. The detailed accounts of Elvis running through flames and breaking down locked doors captured the public imagination in a way that even his music never had. More importantly, the story sparked a national conversation about fire safety in entertainment venues. Reporters began investigating other theaters and concert halls, discovering that locked emergency exits were disturbingly common across the country. The Cleveland fire became a catalyst for change. Within 6 months, Congress passed the Entertainment Venue Safety Act, requiring all theaters and concert halls to undergo rigorous fire safety inspections and imposing severe criminal penalties for locking emergency exits. The law became known as the Elvis Act because of his role in highlighting the problem. Frank Castellano was sentenced to 5 years in prison for reckless endangerment. His 3 venues were sold to pay damages to the victims, and he never worked in entertainment again. But the real change came from Elvis himself. From that night forward, Elvis made fire safety a personal crusade. Before every concert, he personally inspected the venue's emergency exits. If he found any locked or blocked, he refused to perform until the situation was corrected. His contract riders began including specific fire safety requirements. All emergency exits had to be clearly marked, well lit, and kept completely clear. The venue had to provide proof of recent fire safety inspections. Security personnel had to be trained in emergency evacuation procedures. Other entertainers began adopting similar requirements. Concert promoters found themselves forced to upgrade fire safety equipment and procedures or lose access to major acts. The fans who were saved that night never forgot what Elvis had done for them. Many of them organized the Riverside 200, a group that became advocates for fire safety and emergency preparedness. Maria Santos, who was 16 years old that night, said in a 2002 interview, "Elvis could have run out of that building the moment he smelled smoke. Instead, he made sure every single person got out safely before he left. He literally ran through fire to save people he'd never met." That's not just heroism, that's character. James Burton, Elvis's guitarist, reflected on that night years later. "I've played with Elvis for thousands of shows, but I never saw him more in his element than during those 4 minutes in Cleveland. He wasn't performing, he was leading. He took command of a situation that could have been a catastrophe and turned it into a rescue operation. That's when I realized Elvis wasn't just an entertainer, he was someone people could count on when everything went wrong." The Riverside Theater was completely destroyed by the fire, but from its ashes came new fire safety standards that have saved countless lives over the past 60 years. Elvis never publicly talked about his heroism that night. When reporters asked him about running through flames to save fans, he would simply say, "Those were my people in there. You don't leave your people behind." But the impact of his actions extended far beyond fire safety. The story showed America that celebrities could be more than entertainers. They could be leaders in crisis situations. Other stars began using their platforms to advocate for safety issues. Frank Sinatra funded fire safety equipment for Las Vegas venues. Johnny Cash promoted emergency preparedness education. The entertainment industry transformed from being merely about profit to having a sense of social responsibility. Today, every entertainment venue in America has fire safety standards that can be traced back to that October night in Cleveland. Emergency exits can never be locked during events. Fire safety inspections are mandatory and frequent. Evacuation procedures are regularly practiced. These requirements have prevented countless tragedies over the decades. At Elvis's funeral in 1977, a delegation from the Riverside 200 served as honorary pallbearers. They carried a banner that read, "He saved our lives. Now we honor his." The story of the Cleveland fire reminds us that heroism isn't about seeking glory. It's about doing what's right when faced with impossible choices. Elvis could have saved himself that night and let others deal with the crisis. Instead, he risked his life to make sure every fan got home safely. In 4 minutes, Elvis Presley went from being an entertainer to being a lifesaver. But more importantly, he showed that when disaster strikes, real leaders don't run toward safety. They run toward the people who need help. The man who sang Burning Love that night proved that some things are worth more than fame, fortune, or personal safety. Sometimes, the most important performance of your life isn't on stage. It's in the moment when you choose to put other people's lives ahead of your own. If this incredible story of courage and heroism moved you, make sure to subscribe and share this video. Hit that thumbs up to support more stories about real-life heroes who use their fame to help others. Have you ever witnessed someone risk their safety to help strangers? Let us know in the comments and ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the moments that define character.